I am attending the NASA IT Summit, the first annual NASA IT Summit here in Washington, D.C. at the National Harbor in an extremely beautiful location. It's extremely well attended. There were over 1,000 attendees today in a very, very full convention room. There was almost like a stadium-like atmosphere when the NASA CIO Curtin took the stage, and she spoke briefly, but I think she sort of gave away a few points that I'd like to underscore. The first is that she thought that NASA sort of must lead in government in terms of innovation, and that's the role that she thinks that NASA should have. And I actually agree with her because she articulated this point rather well, and I think NASA has lost some of its drive for innovation, but I think under her leadership, she is actually trying to regain that. And then she also mentioned a few things, such as that she believes in open government and in open leadership. And I think those are also interesting concepts coming from a relatively new CIO. She then sort of gave the stage to the first keynote speaker, which was the Dell CIO, James Stallleather, I think. And I have to say that he said a few interesting things about technology and how Dell is actually trying to deal with this, and he tried to sort of project his thoughts in the next over the next few years of what innovation will mean. And he said, for example, that technology is not an issue, but innovation is. I'm afraid, though, that he had very, very bad slides. The font was extremely small; it was almost unreadable even from the third row where I was sitting. It took, for example, a pretty cheap stab at Apple, and I think it was mostly due to envy in that lots of people are looking forward to have simple, usable tools like iPads, which Dell doesn't produce, for example. And then I think the energy in the room actually reached a very new level where when David Cheerley from Gartner, he's the VP at Gartner, entered the room. He was extremely energetic. He was very positive. He actually portrayed a view of the future of innovation and cloud computing that I thought was extremely well done, and with which I had lots of points in common. He basically says that we're back in 1981 again with this frenzy of new, 1981 is when the PC was born, where we're back there, where computing is sort of a crossroads. There was a lot of energy in the room, as I said, and then he articulated his points very, very well. And he spoke about cloud computing basically, and he tried to address all the facets that are that are sort of showing up in the field of cloud computing. So we basically talk about how one has to take three steps in terms of cloud computing. He has to try to consume services from cloud computing. He has to implement services, and he finally has to develop services for cloud computing. And he also talked about analytics, which is, he said, the key to try to make sense of all the data, which I very much agree with. Then he actually threw out there a concept of trying to run analytics completely in memory. So what if you could actually run your database, for example, and your computation completely in memory? And so this will actually open up a lot of interesting applications. David Chitley also talked about the future, and he believes that the future is completely mobile. And I think many of the people at the conference and the speakers actually wholeheartedly agree on this comment. He also believes that in the 2015-2020 time frame, we will see what he calls a context delivery architecture, which is basically this architecture that delivers context to the user, around to the user, no matter where he or she is. And this will sort of cause this merging, if you will, of the digital and real world, which according to him will cause sort of a data explosion, but also an analytics explosion, because we have to actually make sense of that. And he spoke about examples where, again, you could augment, if you will, reality with very simple tools that were very simple engines. I then went to a talk about cloud computing, the definition of cloud computing and mobile computing. It was actually by Alexander Karmer, if I'm not mistaken, from Northrop Grumman, together with Professor Warner, I think, Dr. Warner. And I actually found Dr. Warner in Dr. Warner's introduction okay. I mean, it was not particularly exciting or something, but what I found extremely exciting were Alexander Karmer's I would actually call them awesome mobile scenarios for computing, where he basically dissected a scenario where a very simple question becomes extremely hard to answer unless you actually do a lot of homework before that. He showcased how basically um, environments and first concepts like Wolfram Alpha are trying to answer those questions, but he actually brought a few examples to showcase that even Wolfram Alpha is just the tip of the iceberg. So again, awesome scenarios on how you have to think about provisioning virtual networks and virtual answers, if you will, to your questions in almost real time. So we're not there yet. He said we're getting close to in many areas, but I guess the critical mass has not reached this field. But nevertheless, it was an extremely interesting talk. In the afternoon, after um, Charles Bolden's talk, I went to two talks in the afternoon. One on data transparency by data.gov, the data.gov folks. Again, data.gov is the first attempt of the government to basically make its data sets transparent. And Sonny Bagawalia, I hope I pronounce it right, and Gene Hall presented how data.gov has grown quite dramatically from just a few tens of datasets to over 200,000 datasets, and how it's actually changing the way we look and the way we look at public data. Not just because we can access that data, but mostly because and they showcase this very well. I think lots and lots of users are producing their own mashups. They're producing a value added, if you will, on top of the data that is actually available there. And actually, this is quite interesting because again, none of the applications that were showcased were actually sort of paid for, if you will, by the government. And so this actually, I think, underscores quite dramatically the role that government can have in innovation and perhaps should have when it comes to public data, such as NASA data, but any other data. They showed applications for transportation data and health data, for example. Finally, in the afternoon, I saw a very interesting talk about cloud computing in NASA missions by Daniel Wharton, which is a veteran of NASA missions. He worked on Hubble, I think. He's currently at Goddard as an employee of SGT Inc. And the two things I carried away from his talk were pretty interesting. One was that he would basically use cloud computing for anything he can get his hands on, so to speak, but not because it's a cool thing to do, but because it's the right thing to do for many ways, but also because it's so it seems to be one of the things you can do in terms of increasing the return on investment, but also increasing your return, increasing productivity, and decreasing, if you will, your exposure to failures. The only area where he mentioned that you would not use cloud computing is where you need, let's say, millisecond precision applications, just because of the latency in some of the cloud applications currently available. And finally, when asked by me if he would actually use one of the commercial solutions for cloud computing, like Google Apps or some Microsoft platforms, if you will, he basically said that he will. He's actually in the process of migrating and using Google for his own company. He doesn't know if industry would do that, because perhaps NASA can create its own, and he is creating his own with Project Nebula, perhaps. But nevertheless, it was interesting to figure out that he actually would not discourage companies from using commercial available clouds out there, which I thought was quite interesting. So all in all, it was a very interesting meeting and first day, and I'm looking forward to tomorrow. There are quite a few interesting talks happening tomorrow.